I'm back. Yeah.
Swan song, is that what
Swan
you're doing
song.
this?
We're kind of curious as to why he decided to give us sort of a constructive talk.
Does anybody know whether I'm being fired or not? I just want to
Setting us some signals. But he denies that it means anything other than it's a good time and a good time to take stock of conservation and plant conservation in general. Bill was going to be giving that talk tonight, and you all know Bill, right? Director of Conservation. He's been with the Wildflower Society for 30 plus years. Started with us as a propagator and grew with the program over the years. How many people were on the staff? Like 3 when you started?
like 5 maybe.
We're sort of 25-ish now, grow to about 50 in the summertime with our seasonal staff. And Bill's been at the sort of forefront of innovation in the conservation department and in the plant conservation world for quite some time. So we're really delighted that he chose to take this moment to kind of assess effectiveness, I guess, and what to look forward to in plant conservation. One little note that I should have started with: this is a public door. We didn't know that when they moved us to this room, so people can actually come through. So we're hoping they won't. This is the only handicap accessible entrance to this building, so it's entirely possible that people will come through in the middle, and I think we should just welcome them. Nice. Take a pause, welcome them, invite them to have a membership. Give them a membership form, invite them to town. So don't be startled if somebody comes in that door. But without further ado, we're looking forward to hearing from Bill tonight. So welcome, Bill, and thank all of you for coming.
I was joking earlier, there's an old vaudeville line that says, they say you play this room twice in your career, once on the way up, once on the way down. Ladies and gentlemen, it's good to be back. But really, no, thank you all for coming. I think that's your focus. If it's not, somebody better than I focus this thing. How's that? Is that better? Feel free to ask any questions at any time. I'm going to start with a little talking about the ways that really we look at plant conservation in New England. Talk about some projects that we've done under each of sort of the categories of the ways we look at things. And then the idea about conundrums is, of course, we really don't know what we need to know in most cases in order to conserve a lot of these plants. We just don't have the answers yet. And there are lots of problems, even though we're making headway in some regards. So I'm going to give you some examples of some ones that were successful, ones we're pretty happy with, and then I'm going to give you some ones that we're in the middle of and we're not quite sure where we are with that yet. So the Wildflower Society's mission, conserving and promoting the region's native plants to ensure healthy biological diverse landscapes. So all of this should contribute to that, we hope. These are the big 6. This is the way I at least break things up in plant conservation about what you can do with plants. The first one is protect as much habitat as you can. Second, monitor plant populations for health and threat. The third is collect seeds and bank them. The fourth, and we're going to deal with 4, 5, and 6 mainly tonight, is manage habitats for rare and common plants where necessary. Augment, reintroduce, introduce, and perform manage relocation. And we'll talk more about each of these. As far as habitat, it's basically bigger is better. Get as much as you can now, and we're looking for as much diverse in terms of elevation and in quality of habitat. And the larger you are with these bigger blocks, the more resilient these habitats will have. More resilience the habitats will have. So, and they're also, you want to make sure you have corridors between them, and you want to make sure you have stuff to manage these places because invasive species are now certainly part of the equation. But I'm not going to dwell on that. More of the monitoring. This is our Flora Conservation in New England. This was updated in 2012. We first did this in 1996. It's the list of plants that we consider to be regionally rare, and some of these are globally rare also. But these are the 2 numbers that we're interested in terms of plant conservation on a regional basis. States have plants that are rare in their state, but not rare in the region in many cases. So if you look at that, there's 62 globally rare taxa with approximately 1,300 occurrences, and 326 regionally rare taxa with 2,000 occurrences. That's a lot of occurrences to be worried about, and the fact is we're not going to be able to save all of these particular occurrences of all these species, but we're giving it a shot in terms of seeds. And monitoring, this is pretty good. We have monitored, last year we sent out, people signed up from our plant conservation volunteer program and our professional program with the task forces in each of the states of NEPCOP. They signed up for 956 surveys or seed collections, and we got about half of those done, which is about what we do in a particular year. We usually do half, we just have a lot more people signing up right now, which is really good, and I'm very, very happy about that. Seed banks, to keep every cog and wheel is the first precaution of intelligent tinkering. So save all the parts basically when you're taking something apart, but we are rapidly taking things apart without saving the parts. So that's what seed banks are about. And the targets for seed banks should be rare and endangered species, alpine areas, other ecosystems under threat, and then finally common species for restoration of habitats, which we hope to get more into in the future. We are looking at target 8. 75% of threatened plants should be in ex-situ collections. This is target 8 of the global strategy for plant conservation, and 20% available restoration and recovery. We're hoping to do this by 2020. We've got still some ways to go to do that, but we've had a lot of success recently. We're almost up to 200 collections this year in terms of actual seed bank collections for this. This is really good. But we have to remember, for seed banks, you have a plant in a botanic garden, you have a plant in a seed bank. What do you have if you don't have a place for it to run in the wild? So we have to make sure we have as wild spaces for these plants, these wild habitats for these plants to live in. It's just something we need to continually remind ourselves about. The seed bank's not the end of this. The seed bank's just the beginning of this. It's just a backup for all of this. So 4, 5, and 6 on that chart. Managing habitats, augmenting, introducing, and performing managed relocation. So how do we decide which sites to manage? Basically, we have to now, because of climate change, we have to look at ones that we think are going to persist under climate change. It doesn't do us any good if the habitat's going to change and the plants are going to leave anyway. So we have to figure that out. The management has to be feasible and have a good chance of success. I've said it before, management could suck every dollar out of every plant conservation organization in the United States in order to do it. If we did it all, we really could. You just don't have the money, the time, and the resources to do all of it, so you're going to have to make decisions about populations. It's costly, it's ongoing, and it's going to be here forever. We're going to be managing these populations in one way or another forever. That's why the larger habitats are better, because hopefully there'll be these habitats will sustain themselves more than the inputs we have to put into them. So I want to talk to you about one management thing that we did, and we've been working on this. This is Isacia media lloydii, it's a small rural begonia. It's an orchid, terrestrial orchid. It has the annoying habit, if you're studying it, for going dormant for 8 years at a time. It can do that. It doesn't usually do it, but it can do that, and has been doing it. It blooms in the spring. It's not particularly showy. It blooms in, say, May and early June. It's found, if New England has the lion's share of this species in the United States, and it's threatened under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. It grows in these mixed forests, and it's really, it's hard to see. It looks like mediola, unless you're looking mediola, which is Indian cucumber root. People will look at this and miss it all the time. But we figured out that if we let more light into this, and I can't say that I thought of this. The power company did some work on one population of this nearby and let a whole bunch of light in it, and all these plants came up and flowered and did really well. So I took the credit. And what we did was, at a particular population, we had 2 populations of this that were separated with about 30 yards of hemlock so that light wouldn't bleed through. We cut one of them, we cut about 25% of the basal area selectively to let light into the population. And that would be, whoops, let me back up, and that would be the blue one here, the blue line here. And you can see what happens when we did this in 1998. It took off. If there were, say, 20-something here, it's now over 80 in this particular population. And there are plants popping up in places we never thought we'd see plants before. And we've never seen them. Been looking at this for 30 years, and a plant pops up. So is that a new plant? Has that plant been dormant? Tell me why that plant's there. It's really almost impossible to figure it out. And you can see the one that we haven't done anything to stay about the same as going downhill. So we're thinking about trying to do the same thing with this one now and see what happens to this population. Other people have tried this, and it hasn't worked as well. We were lucky in a lot of ways, a lot of partners on this, but this is an example of something we learned. But recently, we've done even more.
Bill, was that a single species, or it said stems? Did that mean of anything?
No, it meant stems of this species.
Of this species.
Right. So this is a 5-year moving average. You can
Yeah,
see,
yeah, I thought-
one of my staff said, Bill, look, this is your waistline, this is your hairline. At any rate, the point was that when we started looking at the seeds of this, and this was like many things that we do with serendipity, this is the plant, this is the plant when it's in flower. In August, it starts to form these seed pods. And here's a seed pod of it right here. And this is the double flower one. They can have up to 2 flowers. And when they dehisce in October, they produce these seeds. And these seeds are like dust. They're nothing really except an embryo, not even a fully formed embryo in the center of it with this cucumber-like envelope around it. That's all it is. There's no food reserves. There's nothing there. Now, you know that orchids are associated with soil fungi, right? Most of the orchids are terrestrial orchids, and that's how they get started. They become associated with soil fungi. And there's some very good work done by Dennis Wiggin at the Smithsonian showing that the more of this particular kind of fungi you have, the more orchids are going to do well. But in this case, what we did was we decided to bury some seed. Okay, so we took seed in 2003 and we buried it, and we put it in this plankton netting inside this film mouse, and I tied it with fishing line. You have to use number 10, a 10-pound test. If you're a fisherman, yes, you know what I'm talking about. At any rate, this is what we did. We folded the seeds into these plankton nettings, put it inside a slide case, tied it to a post like this, and forgot about it promptly. So 4 years later, we pulled it out, and this is what one of the guys at the Smithsonian wrote about this, Jay O'Neill. You use this tritetrazoline chloride that tests for metabolic activity, and it stains pink or reddish when there's metabolic activity, meaning that these seeds are still alive. So in that year, so 3 years, a seed with no food reserves managed to stay alive for 3 years. So then we forgot about it. Here's what they look like when they're stained. In this 2017, we pulled up a couple of these things. And there's the seeds that show staining. So over 13 years later, this orchid, with no food reserves whatsoever, still has seeds that are viable. At least, 54% of them, 45% of them stained that way. And a lot of them look good. He said they look fabulous. So these species, what it means is that those seeds, those plants that are popping up because of that light, something is stimulating those plants. And they were really new plants popping up. But I've never seen a plant pop up and flower before. So something must be happening underground. Either I'm missing these things, and I don't think we are. We're crisscrossing these populations back and forth to find them. Or the plant can actually become an adult underground and come up on its own and flower. I still don't understand this, but this is the only way I can figure it out. So this Isotria medialoides has the potential to form a long-lived seed bank, and the seed bank can explain why plants, what we think are new plants, emerge over many years. But I think the interesting thing is, if we do more of this with orchids, and we can understand how long the seeds live in the soil, then we can make decisions about whether or not to try to manage populations. Because if a population has declined down to nothing, and it's been that way for 5 or 6 years, or 8 years, and we know the seeds can last for 4 years, in the soil at least, and then they're destroyed, it helps us make decisions about what we can do with these populations. So that's the sort of information I'm after in terms of practical information about management of some of these populations. So we'll move on to augmentation. Augmentation is helping the population, adding the plants of the same genotype, from the same source to that single population. Reintroduction, a lot of people aren't like introduction or reintroduction because they think it confuses people, because most of that's applied, introduction's applied to introducing something that's not native, right? So, but we're still using those terms. Reintroduce means putting it back to where it was, assuming that the factors that caused it to go downhill in the first place have been removed. That wouldn't be very smart if you didn't do that. Introducing it to new sites of appropriate habitat within those historic range. And we've done some of this. First one that comes to mind is really the one of Mount Washington. This is Pocatilla rubinsiana, the dwarf cinquefoil. We worked on this with the Appalachian Mountain Club and a number of other groups. And our role had to do with mainly with growing plants and transplanting. There's the alpine zone of Mount Washington. I don't think that is Mount Washington, but that's pretty forbidding there. With robin cinquefoil, this size plant right there is probably 10 to 20 years old. It's the size of a quarter. It grows in these areas where these frost lines form, and the reason is it survives there somehow, although sometimes it gets kicked out too, ejected too. But no other species can't stand this, and somehow this Pocatilla has been able to survive and has been able to adapt to these particular conditions. It's 2 places in the White Mountains, and that's all where it grows in the entire world. Okay? So it likes this tough environment. I mean, the snow is blown, this area is outside the Lake of the Clouds hut, and the snow is blown off of this. So you can imagine how cold it is. The snow is providing insulation for most of these other plants, not for this guy. So the threats are basically natural mortality can be ejected. The hiking trail went right through the middle of the population. The Crawford Path went right through the middle of the population. And there are an astonishingly large number of herbarium specimens of this that have been collected by botanists over the years from this site also. So botanists are not immune to being greedy too. So first thing that happened was they rerouted the trail. The trail used to go up here and the plants are right around the corner up there. The trail used to go right by them. They closed it and sent it around. You can imagine the outcry. Oh, we can't move this trail. This historic trail, we can't move this. Right. It seems to have done fine when you move it. Nobody cares anymore. A lot of monitoring went in. That's Eileen Kane, who used to run the plant conservation program, in the PCB program, volunteers. She was working on this in the White Mountains with Doug Wyrick, who's with AMC. We're trying to figure out what the populations were doing before we started introducing them and afterwards. This is the size of the plants and taking the cutting of a seed pod. This is the way that they arrive in these containers for us. We grow them up with using either gibberellic acid to get it to germinate or giving it a cold period. I prefer doing a cold period. This is a 1 year, that's about this year's germinated seedling, and this is about the 2nd year, which would take maybe 8 to 10 years up there to get to that size. But at lower elevations, we can get them to grow faster. The problem is they also don't like the heat, so it's really a tricky thing to get them to grow. So nevertheless, we did that. And I thought that what we should do is take this alpine plant, because there's such a difference in May and June down at the sea level where we are at Garden Woods, as opposed to them up there still having snow up there, and things are starting to bloom in June and July is when we start seeing flowers up there. I thought, let's take these plants, wrap them in plastic and put them in the freezer, and then bring them out of the freezer and put them up there, and when they go up there, they'll just be ready, they'll be right at the right stage and they'll go. It didn't sound crazy to me at the time, I want to let you know that. But as it turned out, we did have some success, but they weren't doing that well. I have to say one thing though, on the ride up there, in the truck, on the ride up to Mount Washington coming out of the freezer, they would green up. These plants were ready to go. And the ones they as soon as it gets warm, they're gone. But basically, we later decided, look, let's just try and see what happens. And we found out that just planting them up there, even from Garden in the Woods at the lower elevations, even more advanced than they were up there, as long as they weren't getting night after night of freezing temperatures, they would survive. And that's what happened. We were able to do it. So this is the way we truck them up there. We truck them up in these boxes and backpacks. Those are the plants. We plant them out, water them in with water from streams up there, and put these tags on them so we know which plants to where. Unfortunately, ravens really like these red tags. They just pick them up and look them and drop them wherever they want to. So there's some confusion about which plants are doing which, but this was back in late 1990 and 2000. So the results are that right now there's a lot more plants right there. This was back in 1999. As a result of this, and actually we replanted some on Mount Lafayette where there was a known population that had disappeared. We replanted some there, and they were surviving and doing well and actually increasing And as a result, it was delisted. It was made no longer an endangered species, one of the first species ever to be removed from the endangered species list because both the introduced and the natural populations increased. And there was a post-delisting census in 2006 and showed that they were still doing well, but what you don't know about the Endangered Species Act is once they're delisted, they go through that 5-year listing process, delisting process, a 5-year census, and then if they meet that census, that's it, they're gone. They don't get any more attention, they don't get any more money, it's gone. So you get to the 5 years, if you're good for 5 years under the act, you're gone. And that's the way it works for plants anyway. So, I think they're doing a recensus this year to try to figure out what is going on with this species. But we've also put in a small viewing garden. We're actually trying to grow some plants now for that. We'll put some back up there on Mount Washington, still in this viewing garden, which is by the new path, so people aren't as tempted to go and look at the plants in the area they're not supposed to be in. And they had really good results. They put a pedal, when they closed off that path, they put a pedal underneath it to see how many people would still go through it. And they got like 80% of the people didn't use it. There were a couple of people who did, and it went down over the years after that, so they still watched it. So I thought that was pretty good. Another introduction we did was Aglaonus acuta. Aglaonus acuta, the sandplain Gerardia, is this small little annual, and it's called a hemiparasite because it has to have a host species when it's young. And this species is an annual, so what happens is the seed falls to the ground, plant germinates, it has to go through the winter in order to germinate. The seed germinates, the plant attaches itself to a host species, usually a grass, usually a little blue stem. We were able to grow it in pots with a little blue stem. And then the plant flowers prolifically and then dies. Okay? And it has to repeat the cycle over again. So the seed bank is really what's making this thing good. Now with introductions, I just have to say, we've done a bunch of introductions, and you think you know, as much as you think you know what you're doing, well, I like to think I know what I'm doing, it's really hard sometimes to say, yeah, this looks like perfect habitat, and then it just doesn't work out. And you're never 100% sure about that. It's not always successful. What is good habitat? I'm going to get into that in a minute with another species, but you really need to understand what a good habitat looks like to even have a shot at introducing some of these things. This is in sandplain grasslands. It had been restricted to graveyards in Massachusetts, 4 graveyards in Massachusetts. And why was it in the graveyards on the sandplain? Because something about the mowing disturbance at the right time of the year actually made this species do well in those graveyards. It wasn't doing great. We took seed, put it in the Francis Crane Wildlife Area down there, and now there are 100,000 of these down there. We introduced it to that area down there with the state. There are 100,000 of them in that particular area right now. So it's a successful introduction. This is what it looks like when it's on the hemiparasitic on the grasses. Each one of these flowers lasts a day, and they're pollinated by bumblebees. Okay, and that's what the seed pods look like. This is not ripe yet. These turn brown, and the seeds inside are bright orange. It's kind of interesting. The plant's about this tall. There's the habitat. When it's mown, you'll see it, mown in the plants. You can see the plants very easily. These pitch pines would be marching towards if this field was not mown, these pitch pines would be marching towards yours, and that would be the end of the Aglaonus. So we had some success with this one, so we're pretty clear about that. The one I want to tell you about the most today is this 5 and 6 combination, the one that we augmented populations and we performed managed relocation. And I'll get a little bit into managed relocation because it's controversial among botanists. And that's with Astragalus rubensii variety Giuseppii, no touch. Feathery list is an endangered species, grows in 3 places in the world along the Connecticut River. 16-mile stretch of the Connecticut River. That's all it is in the entire world. The plant likes these rocky outcrops where they are totally scoured by ice and water during the spring floods. Totally scoured. Now the scouring keeps the woody plants at bay most of the time, but it also takes away a lot of the habitat, a lot of the plants themselves. So it's a double-edged sword for this plant living where it does. And invasive species have started to invade these ledges now, okay, because they're invasive species are everywhere now. So That's something else they had to contend with. At any rate, the plants, the seeds of this, by the way, sink. You'd think they'd float down the river, right? Starting boom, down the bottom. Don't tell Fish and Wildlife I did that. Anyway, this is what it looks like in flower. It forms lots of seed pods. It's maintaining itself again by seed on this particular site. These are the seed pods. When they start to drop it, they have about 10 in each one of them. Some of them have dropped in each of these things. It's really quite attractive. And the seeds are really neat, little heart-shaped seeds inside there. So, I'm going to give you some data. You guys, I want you to memorize this table before we leave tonight. I do basically want to, there's a couple things you can take away with this, and I'll just tell you what they are. The plant is a short-lived perennial. So what happens is, the first year it germinates, forms a little seedling. Second year, that seedling turns into a plant. The third year, that plant blooms, and it's gone. It doesn't necessarily, most of the time, make it to a fourth year. So it's on a 3-year cycle. And if you start looking at these things here, you can see the populations. They get boom, 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 and then they go down, and boom, boom, and build up again. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, it's responding biologically to that. So what we thought we'd try to do at these places when we started working on this was we try to break that cycle. So we'd start putting in populations in plants to break that cycle, get another seed load in there so that we could break the cycle so we could have the things going all the time. That's what we thought we'd do. I just want to remind you about 2005 because I'm going to come back to that in a little while. So this is the part of the chart from 2010. And look at this. It went from, this is SF, went down from 135 to 33, dropping down, now coming back up. It went from, this HL went from that down to 6 plants. That's when people were panicking. And it's coming back up. And the third site, JH, is doing the same thing, has always been larger. But the median before 2013 on these things was much higher than most of where these populations are now. So the question is, what the hell happened? Why did this happen in 2010? I'll come back to this chart a little bit later. Well, this is the site. This is one of the sites that we worked on the Connecticut. There we are, bringing the plants in. And you can see, you'll notice, you're going to see a lot of mud around because in the spring, after the spring floods, every year this site floods. And after the spring, there's mud dumped on here. And the plants don't seem to mind it if it's not too heavy. But I'll get into that in a minute. There are bolts at every 10 meters, both a high bolt and a low bolt at all the sites. So we know exactly how many plants are within each portion of the ledge itself. So here we are. I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. At least I'm sure I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. There's some mud, there's some plants that we put in along the way. This is what the seedlings look like when they come up for us at Garden Woods. If we give the seed, we scarify the seed with sandpaper, and that's enough to break the coat to get it to germinate. It doesn't need a cold period. We get them to germinate quite well. We let them get another set of leaves on them before we put them out. So we're trying to put these out in May, early June. We started, and I don't have a picture of this, thank God. We started out with an irrigation system that I dreamed up, and that was we put a couple of barrels, water barrels up above. You have them hooked on a timer. It goes down to a drip irrigation, and these are spaghetti tubes that come down. That's just a weight that holds it, and then it irrigates every one of these plants that we put in. That turned out to be a disaster. There was too much water for the plants. They really didn't like that. In fact, what the plants like to do in the summer is they don't want to be baking in the hot sun and burning up, but they really like to dry out some in the summer. We had no idea about that until we tried to irrigate them during the summer, and we found it just rotted them all off. So that didn't work too well. But since then, we've planted them in here without any irrigation. They do seem to survive. A number of them do survive, although we'll talk about that in a second. So that's what it looks like in the fall. It's got a big blue stem on it. It's full of plants. The whole thing is full of plants all summer long. And those plants are actually shading these species, these little tiny seedlings, and allowing them to live where there's almost no soil. Almost no soil in the whole thing. And they're allowing them to live in these cracks and so forth. And that's really why this species is still there. Now, I mentioned invasive species, so we have been treating this. We have been treating black swallowwort, which actually, interestingly enough, at one of these sites, it's one of the first sites outside of Harvard where it was introduced into this country. It's one of the first sites outside of Harvard where it appeared. And I think that a Harvard professor went to this town nearby here and actually planted that and was actually responsible for moving it around in New England. That's only a guess, but I'm gonna blame Harvard anyway. So, we use what's called the bloody glove technique, where we have, we spray herbicide on a cotton glove over top of that, and we actually just wipe the leaves of the black swallowwort, so we're not spraying any of the plants around, anything around the actual stragglers. This is Jeff Taylor from Vegetation Control Services. He's usually a guy who's out there spraying power lines with a big boom, right? He thinks this is just great. He's out there with like this. Anyway, he just retired. He's actually started his own company again. So, but anyway, we have to treat these things, and we do that. We found that we have to keep after the swallowwort, and because there's some question about whether the intensity of the flooding, because of the dams that are on the river, is the same as it's been in the past, because the hillside seems to be marching down the slopes more than it was. But we're not quite sure about that, as I'll get to in a minute, in terms of what's happening to these plants. So back to the charts. We have put in 78 plants at this place since 2011. And it's gotten a little bit, and that would have been that equaled about 7 flowering plants. We're lucky if we can get 50% of them to survive to the next year. And then we're lucky if we can get a portion of that to flower the year after that, okay? This one, we really went hog wild on. We put 470 plants in there since 2011. 98 of them flowered, so they're gonna dump some seed there. They're dumping some seed there. But there's been some problems. There've been a few problems. If you look at this site, what we have here, these colored sections indicate where the number of inflorescences were, the number of flowers there were in 2005. So with this white, there were any plants in 2005. The lighter colored ones are I think 1 to 100, 1 to 99. This color is probably 100, 1 to 199, and this is 200 to 700 blooms. And if you look there now, something's changed. They aren't here. There are a few in here. There are a few there, but you can see most of the plants that are in there now aren't in the same place as they were before, especially in the lower sections of the river. What's going on? Not sure yet. But that was a very revealing chart when we started figuring that out about where they were, where the plants were, and where they were surviving in the river. Then remember, back in 2005, there were 2,000 flowering plants, 2,000 inflorescences here. Now we're down to what, 87, 89, something like that. So what happened in 2010? That's the question. It had to do with severity of floods. I think it's about severity of floods and timing of floods. Floods that happen, especially during the growing season, are really death to this species. They really are. They bury this, because they'll bury the site in mud, and the plants will be, you won't even see them. We've seen little tips sticking out of the mud like this. So what happened in 2010 was, in October, they had 52,000 CFS from the Connecticut River, that's cubic feet per second. Now we know, from the gauge at West Lebanon, we know that there's a mild flooding in SF at 43,000. So 50,000 got it up somewhere between mild and moderate there. 52,000 buried this site in severe flooding. And in this site, it got up to almost all of it, didn't get up to the top bolt, the upper bolts right there. Not only that, it happened again in mid-October. In April, they're used to this. I'm not worried about April, but this October one bothered me a bit. Because that's oftentimes when the plants are just getting ready to set for the year, they form these rosettes, and if you bury them, it's really not going to be good for these things, for these plants to survive over the winter. So there have been a bunch of other flooding events. Irene, 100,000 cubic feet per second. Hurricane Irene just nailed the Connecticut River. Only 40,000 for 3 days here, but it was in August, prime time, and the plants are still alive, okay? There were these other floods, April. I'm not as worried about April and February. This is the one last year that crushed us. We had a great crop of plants last year. We put in lots of plants. And in July, it hit 55,000 CFS and was 40,000 for 2 days in early July. About a month after we put seedlings that are this tall. and that left 6 inches of mud on top of these plants. So, and the flood's taken out most of our introduced sites. This is what the gauge looks like. What do you think this is in July? Those are power releases. This dam, they control the power on this dam. I don't see it at this stage, it's not hurting anything we do. But you can see that right here, here's a release. This is during the day, and it drops down at night. And during the day, peak, it drops down. And this is when July hit right there. That's when the storm hit, and when I'm almost up to 55,000. So you can go online and you can look up these gauges, and you can figure out, we relate the gauges to where we are in the river, so we can understand if they're underwater or not, so we know that pretty well. So, knowing this, and knowing that we've had moderate success, I told you there was a conundrum here, this is one of them. We have, what do you do with a species that is only located in 3 places on a 16-mile stretch of the Connecticut River and could get buried at any time? What do you do about this? Well, you try to find other places to put it, and you have to go beyond the historic range, which we didn't talk about very much. But we didn't have much choice about doing this, because this is something that botanists, and when we sit around and have these conversations about this at our task force meetings, some people have very strong feelings about moving plants beyond the historic range. And if you talk to people in North Carolina about moving plants up here, they don't want to hear it, okay? But it may happen with climate change anyway. They may be forced to do this, but it's a topic, I just want to say it's a topic that's controversial, so you don't do this lightly. But we had no choice. If you're going to go, there weren't any suitable ledges that we could find, and we paddled the entire river above where we were, except within the same pool that we were in. So we had to go above it. And it didn't make much sense to be in the same pool anyway. If you were having problems with the natural populations, you kind of have to go out of that anyway. So we're forming that. So we've done this for a while now. Whoops, let me go back here. The sites, this site we put 78 plants in, we have nothing now. This site we put 50 in, we have nothing now. 61 and 2, we really don't know what we're looking for, do we? We think the places look good, we think the habitat looks good, we're looking at the associated species there, we're looking at the ledges, we think it looks good. But there's one site that I poo-pooed. I said, no, this is never going to make it here. I had 4 different spots in this one site, and this one site, which is a crack in the rock, it's about this wide and 30 feet long, has taken. Just shows you that I don't know anything about this plant whatsoever. It's got 64 flowering plants and 90 seedlings growing in this crack in the rock. It's about 30 feet long. Is it good habitat for this species for the future? No. I mean, it can't go anywhere. It's not going out of this crack in this rock. But right now, this is where it is. And we know that a lot of times, again, that July flood, it affected these new sites too. So the other side, these guys were done in 14, 15, and 16. They had a chance to get established. These ones in 17, they didn't have a shot. They really did because of that July flood. So we are now looking for other sites. We think, and don't hold me to this, we think that we've got somebody who's going to look at the LIDAR situations. The LIDAR, which gets down to about 2.5 feet range on the thing. It's radar from planes up above, right? Laser, and we're going to use that with various layers, GIS layers, to actually pinpoint where sites would be along the Connecticut River. Try to match up as best we can what information we can get from LIDAR on the sites that we have, and then see, using a computer, see where those sites are all along the way of the river. That's our next move for the species, to try to find out. But it's not going to be within the historic range, it's going to be outside of the historic range of the species. Just 2 more things I want to talk to you about. We have been doing, and this is not about rare and endangered species, we've been doing experimental restoration techniques on Cadillac Mountain. Terrible view of the Gulf of Maine there. We were contracted by the Park Service to do a vegetation survey of the summit, test methods to restore the vegetation, and use these results to draft a plan for a larger scale restoration in the future. So we got some funding the first year from Friends of Acadia. Arthur Haynes and Joe Weber went up there, tried to duplicate some previous surveys, pretty hard to do. Couldn't find a lot of the plots, but we managed to find that there were 145 species of plants up there. They did an entire inventory and found 4 rare plants on the top of Cadillac Mountain. Cadillac Mountain, how many people have been to the top of Cadillac? I'm just curious. Okay. They did plot sampling on the transects, found the same vegetation assemblies, except there's another one coming in, a mixture-based community that includes many non-native species. That's coming into Cadillac now, probably from all of us driving up there, right? So we set out and inventoried 60 potential plots for restoration of where we went in impacted areas. Now, they have areas that are impacted that they have now excluded from visitors, but there are a number of other areas that are there. And this is what the top of Cadillac Mountain looks like, and some of our plots where we have these things set up. Most of our restoration is occurring here and here right now, the restorations that we're trying to experiment. So what is it about Cadillac? In 1947, Mount Desert burned, and it really burned. I mean, it burned almost all the entire island. This is full of trees on top of this, and it burned off everything, including burned all the organic matter in the soil. Then you had lots of rain up there, some huge rain events, and whatever organic matter was left in the soil was just washed down the mountain. Add to that 500,000 to 800,000 visitors. They closed the auto road, I think, 13 times this past year because the traffic was too bad. Okay, going up there, you can drive up there. They started some visitor exposures because they could see visitors making all these paths through all the vegetation. If everybody stayed on the rocks, it'd be fine. I mean, it's rock. It's mostly rock, right? But nobody does. And the impact is greatest in this barren rock, gravel, and heath communities where the rocky balls provide the vistas. So what we decided to do, and here's a vista here, these fences have been replaced with black ropes at this point. That's the way they originally started doing it. And this is the gravel sort of stuff here. There's really no organic matter in that at all. And the plants that grow there from year to year, there are a lot of annuals that come up and make it one year and then die. Okay, a lot of times. And so the process starts all over again. It's really hard to get a foothold in that because there's no organic matter in the soil. So we chose some locations, we identified species that we wanted to put in, we selected species for collection. Jill, who lives up there, collected seed over the summer. We counted the seed at the society. It took us 3 days to clean all the seed. Whoops, let me back up. And we put in all these treatments. So we had no treatment, rope outline, and a coir, which is that netting you see over top for erosion control. It's made of coconut hull. We used that to hold the soil down. We added soil, just to only put some coir on top of it. We added seed and no soil, just to the gravel, to see what would happen with that, put coir on it. We sowed seed and added some organic matter and put coir on top of that. And then we grew some plants in flats, and we grew some plants in plugs. And we tried to sterilize soil. We've tried all sorts of stuff. Okay. And this is just an idea of some of the plots up there. We now have much more pleasing dark green sandbags and all things now. But you know, it was actually the education people were really excited about it. They said the visitors were asking all about it. But for some reason, the park police didn't like it, so we had to change to the green bags. I didn't quite understand that one. At any rate, here's just the rope only outline. Here's what coir looks like when it's put on the ground. So here you have coir only covered over the sandbags, and we're measuring all the germination of sowing. You know exactly what we put in there. Sometimes we started adding this compost on this when we first did this. This is important. And then sowed seed on top of that. There's some evidence that the coir itself catches seeds more than just having open soil, so and holds a little moisture in there too. These are some of the guys from the park. This is from the exotic vegetation crew, and they think this project's great because they don't have to go out and spray during the day. They're great. They're fabulous guys. They're really, really good. You can see the black rope around this exposure right now, some of the things that we do. And we tried to sow seed in the wind up there. It's interesting. So we sowed a lot of seed, 1,000 seeds in these 2 meter square plots, and we grew plants in the greenhouse, and we potted them up in April, and we transplanted the modules. These are some of the plants that we grew, the plants that we grew at Masami, and these are some of the modules when they're first planted, and that's what they look like when they form this solid mat in the soil by the time we get them in June. So we can take this, the idea of what these modules was, they've shown that in very steep areas, if you have modules to hold the soil better, you can hold the soil rather than just putting soil up there and trying to put plants in and hoping that they get the roots down to hold the soil before it washes away. So we tried this, but we're really not in an area right there where we have, it's so steep that we need these modules, but still the plants seem to do better. And there's a truck full of stuff that we carted up there. Germination, that's Jill, she complains about this photograph saying she has a sausage finger. And so what we found was sowing with added soil and guar produced the best results. So you put down soil, you put down seed on top of that, you get good results. And if you just have a rope or no treatment or just acquire, you don't get results. But what happened was, the weird thing was, when we sowed seed without adding soil, we expected to get good germination. We didn't get that great. It's about the same between adding soil alone without sowing any seed in it and just sowing seed without adding any soil, okay? What's going on? Well, we noted that a small amount of the compost that we put on there in these places, when we just put the compost down, it had totally broken down in 1 year. And what had happened was it had stimulated all that seed bank that's underneath all that rock and gravel and everything else. It all popped up. But it doesn't have a good time after that. Once that compost is gone, okay, it's not going to continue to grow. It's not. And organic matter is the key. I think Jill summed it up well. She said plants need soil. That's what we got out of it. So, yeah,
Lichen grows,
lichen on rock.
yeah, doesn't add any moisture. And
Sure,
And gets it.
it does. It's able to live on a rock where there's not much moisture. Remember, it's a combination of two creatures too. You know, right? So organic matter is the key for this. And we actually, when we were doing the restorations, it's a good point. We're bringing the soil up. You can see where the soil has gone. There's a line right there where the soil line is, right where the lichens start. We're bringing the soil up to that line right there on the rocks. So you're going right back up to where the soil actually was. So plant survival in the modules itself was good, except for a few species. I'm not quite sure where this is going yet, but we're hoping that plugs, we can use plugs as well as modules. The modules over here, they tend to produce bigger plants than the plugs do, but what happens up there, we're not sure which one is going to survive best, but the plugs, what the plugs give the advantage of doing is you can tailor, we can go up there, we can look at an area, we can say, here's an area we want to restore, what plants do we want to put in there, and we can just plug plants in all the way through that to make sure that we're absolutely trying to reproduce what's already there so it looks very natural. We used a soil sterilizer this last year to sterilize the soil we put up there because we're trying not to introduce anything up there. And this is one of the areas we did. This was the social path that came down, sandbags blocking it, but this is like 200 plants stuck in there. We're going to see what happens this year. So we're pretty psyched about this. The park is very psyched about this. And we're hoping that this is really going to, we figured out how to do it, but I don't think it's going to be through seed. I think we have to grow plants and do it. The seed's just going to take too long for it to get started, although we're still doing seed plots and sowing them and watching to see what happens, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. Finally, I want to leave with this. Who knows what this is? I'll be really surprised if anybody does. This plant is Schwalbe americana, chaff seed. It was last observed in New England in Nantucket County in 1963. It was found in 2018 on Cape Cod by a PCV, Plant Conservation Volunteer. It is another hemiparasite. Here's the field where it was. These are plants. This is his slide growing this. This plant grows in about 17 places in the entire, currently 17 places, most of them in North Carolina and the South. Then it jumps to New Jersey, and it used to be in New England, and now it is again, okay? So we are going to be, the Wildflower Society, we've got the contract to go out and look for new populations of this and look at historic sites to see if there's any chance that the plant is still at the historic sites in Massachusetts. And there's a model that they use. Unfortunately, it's based on most of the southern, but these are the things that characteristics they've come up with. And then when you use these characteristics, you throw them in a computer, pulling a rabbit out of a hat, it shows you what areas are most likely fitting for the Schwalbe after you have all the characteristics. And so all we have to do is go all over Nantucket, just a small portion of Martha's Vineyard, and the entire Cape Cod looking for this. So it should be pretty easy for us to find this plant. Luckily, they are thinking about redoing the model, just using the one population in New Jersey and the Massachusetts one to try to change the model around. But that's our task for the next year. The staff is really looking forward to this, they are, because they're gonna get out in the field and do a lot. At any rate, I just wanted to show you some of the things we've been working on, some of the things we have for the future, and thanks very much for listening. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. No? Fine with me, let's have something to drink. Thank you all.
Really good question.
I was just wondering about the astragalus and the dam situation with the power releases. I know that when FERC gets relicensing opportunities every 30 years or whenever dams come up, it really is a long period of time. Whether negotiations could take place about protecting.
They have, yes.
Okay.
It's a really good question. The fact is that most of the dam, we don't know enough about the dams to know we think that the number of flooding events is the same as it was in the past, but we think that the intensity of those events is usually less. Now, I say that, but you can see what these storms have done recently to this, so how can it be less? But if you figure, you have a run of the river, you have all that power coming down the river, and you stop it here, and you stop it here, you're going to have less intense in between there. So I'm not really sure who that was, but we did talk to FERC about this, and we did manage to say, you're gonna have to stay within these parameters in terms of what you're doing about these releases, because the releases that they're doing are not, except in extreme events, extreme rain events, the releases they're doing aren't getting up to the level of the astragalus. Okay? On those daily releases you were seeing, they're not effective. We almost lost a couple of backpacks because the water comes up in 2 hours. but we haven't, it's not getting up to the level of the population of plants. What I don't understand is going to take some more work to figure out is why are those lower, if that's true, why are all those plants in the lower sections of this ledge, why aren't they there? And I don't have the answer for that. I don't have the answer.
They're not doing any releasing for hydropower or anything.
It's all hydropower. That's what it is.
As you know, when it's gonna be furiously hot, air conditioners go on.
Right, but the water, the times that happens, we can look at the gauges, we can see exactly what the release is and how many cubic feet's coming down the river, per second is coming down the river. And it's not getting, when they're releasing this, it's not getting up to the level of the plants. It's just not getting there. Because we know exactly where the elevations are. So we're sure about that. So I can't criticize the dams for that. And the dams have been there for, what, 100 years?
Yeah.
They've been there for an awful long time too. So it could be that, we're seeing the effect now. I mean, it could be that we're just having more flooding events, more rain and more flooding events, and that we will have that in the future too. That could happen too. So I don't know. Ooh.
Why are these plants rare? That is, is it sort of that they're living in very narrow niches and there never were many of them? Are the niches disappearing? I mean, in other words, are these just kind of obscure plants anyway that never had
Of course they're
large
obscure.
populations?
No, they had.
Or, give us some context on what makes these rare.
Well, the context is this: the Astragalus robinsii, okay, the type species, was found. I'm not sure who found it, but anyway, it was found a long time ago, and that population was in Vermont, in Winooski, Vermont. So it's Astragalus robinsii, variety robinsii, and it's underwater now at where the Winooski Dam is. Okay, so that's gone. There's another Astragalus robinsii called variety minor that's found on cliffs, dry cliffs, and dry areas. Totally different habitat, totally different plant. It's to be about this tall. Okay, and then there's this thing. Okay, now there are a couple other robinsiis in other parts of the country too, believe it or not. And it's not clear to me, to be fair, when they've done what's called a principal character analysis, there seems to be, they come out with these big squares and rectangles and polygons, and it shows you which ones are related to each other. And a lot of these things are pretty close to each other. So people are doing genetic work now. We're actually trying to do some genetic work on the population that we have in New England from a Professor Brown, who's going to take some of this and try to work on this. They do appear by habitat alone certainly to be different creatures. Okay, they just are. It's not the same beast. Whether genetically they're any different or not, I can't tell you. But that's the story of the stragglers of Binzai. Isn't that amazing? I don't know, but that's where it is, and it's been known for an awful long time. I mean, 1800s, they found this thing, and you can imagine these guys going up and down the river, these old botanists in canoes looking for this. I mean, that was, they did that. They went up and down the river. Sure. Well, thank you again. Oh, one more, sure.
The isotria, the graph you showed us, the two differences. With regards to how do you protect such a species that requires periodic caring?
Well, here's the situation. That's a great
What
question.
will you do?
Right.
You obviously can just leave, wildland and let it just do its own thing.
You're exactly right.
Somebody has to come in and do something. So what do you think should be done?
What we found, and what I think anyway, is that Isotria, when you look at the woodlands around this Isotria plant, the thing that you notice is that the white birch is on the ground and is dead. Now, white birch lives for 40 to 70 years, okay? And we have pictures of other spots of this that were open fields, but now they're woodlands with Isotria. So sometime during the time that birch came in, and whatever fungus came in with the birch, and we've actually seen fairy rings of Isotria around dead birch trees, okay, just like this, totally based on the fungus. That, as long as you have that fungus, okay, you're going to have the Isotria there. Now, I think the fungus also likes to be in areas that are not totally shaded out. So as the forest grows up, you're going to have to do something to that forest. And in the old days, probably, there were natural blowdowns, there were all sorts of different open spaces that this plant could go to, but they aren't there anymore. Now we have open fields that are mowed, which is not going to get into, but in these forests, these early successional forests, I'm guessing that this species is really more of an early successional species than a more of a late successional species in a forest. And in order to maintain it, you're going to have to continue to manage forests. And I think that there'll be a way, I don't think this could be a win-win. I mean, a landowner could take trees, if it's done right, can take trees off its property and still have this species exist there. So I think it can be a win-win if it's done correctly. I don't think you want to drive skidders over it, but interestingly enough, and we found old skid roads with Isotria growing on the edges of old skid roads from 50 years ago. So, I mean, who knows? But I think it's going to take some management. You're absolutely right. Thank you.